be it resolved that Peel Police review the practice of having police officers in schools and provide recommendations to the Police Services Board taking into consideration the impact on young Black youth.
All those in favor? Carried. All right, now we go to the presentation. Chief, you have a couple of presentations. You want to introduce your Peel Regional Police Neighborhood Policing Unit program?
Good morning. This morning we have Dr. Linda Duxbury, Mr. Tony Pontus. So Dr. Duxbury is from a professor from the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University, and then Mr. Tony Pontus, the director of Peel District School Board, and Ms. Marianne Mazarato, the director of the Peel Catholic School Board. So I'm going to ask the three of you to come forward. They're going to do their presentation and then they'll be open to questions from the board.
Can I make a commentary about the school she comes from? One of the best schools. One of the best schools.
You graduated from Carleton.
One of the best schools in Canada.
I agree. With great graduate students, of course.
Thank you.
So this is, thank you for inviting me. This is kind of unusual for me because I'm almost unable to sit and speak. I usually stand and speak. So this is going to be very challenging for me, so forgive me. And I tried when I put this deck together. This is a massive study. It's probably the largest in its kind in the world of this particular topic. And I would like to really acknowledge the cooperation of the school boards. It's been unbelievable. We could never have got this study done without these school boards and without the Peel Police and without your cooperation. So the first part of the deck is just a recap, because I know that this deck is going to go to a lot of people. So for example, I know the OPP are staying just because they want to hear this, because they're the only other jurisdiction that still has police officers in high school in Ontario, and one of the few in Canada. And so the problem and the challenge for everybody who wants to follow this kind of program is how can you show the value of it. And so, you know, I put the first part of the deck, and I'm sorry if it's a repeat, because we've talked before about this, but I'll go through it very quickly, and then I'll give you a little bit of the data. And it's only a very little bit of data. I'm completely swamped by data. We're going to have such amazing data, and again, the cooperation from the school. We did a survey in September in 5 high schools of grade 9s and 10s, and we've got over 1,300 survey responses back. And we're just going out again now. So it's very difficult to get that kind of data in these populations without tremendous cooperation. So it all stemmed, we have a big SSHRC, that's Social Sciences Humanities Research Council grant. We are working with 6 police services across Canada. We had over 20 to choose from. We picked Peel because we think that your police service is one of the top in the country in terms of innovation, in terms of what they're doing. We asked each service to identify a project that they wanted us to spend our time and energy working on. They picked the NPU program in the community, and to use a technique called social return on investment. So for example, I was talking to the OPP, and they were saying, well, how do you show the value? Because it's so much soft stuff. Everybody instinctively knows that having a police officer in a high school makes a difference. But how do you prove that, you know, is very, very, very challenging. So the NPU program was set up to ensure that through cooperative programs between the school community and the police and the neighborhood policing unit assigned to the school shall strive to create a safe and positive environment in which to learn, work, visit, and live. And so, as I said before, it's very easy to identify the costs. The costs are the time of the officers that we're devoting to that rather than other services that they could be devoted to. It's very challenging to actually, and I'm a business school prof, so you know we like to talk about all of the nice stuff, but show me the beef is where it eventually comes down to. And so, despite their popularity, the very first thing we did was try to look at a systemic and systematic review of these programs around the world, and we could not find anything. So the solution was to use this technique called social return on investment, and what it is a technique. You know, there's many examples, not just within policing, within municipal governments, healthcare, etc., of things that people provide a service to your community that offers value. But how do you actually quantify that value? And the technique that's being used now is called social return on investment. And it is because no matter how much we talk about morality and value, people want to hear money. And so this is a technique to translate value into some kind of dollars and cents, etc. So it will be, it is the first of its kind, and when it actually comes out, I know because people keep contacting me and saying, when is it coming? And I keep saying, soon, soon. And so it will, I think, shed a positive light on Peel, everybody who's involved in it. So just a very quick recap. So what was the purpose? It was to calculate the value of one of Peel Police many programs, which is the MPO program. We're calculating it for the police itself, the regional government, the 2 school boards who are involved, the stakeholders in the 5 partner schools, because they have spent so much time and energy, we feel obliged to give them back special presentations. All other school boards, because they're all interested in this, all other partner police services, and the community, especially in the catchment area. The background to this is the dialogue on policing is increasing all the time. Everybody is saying police cost, cost, cost. So what value do they add? And the program, the actual period of evaluation was for 1 school semester. So we started in September and we finished just at the end of February. And the goal is to do 1 more set of surveys, the longitudinal component, before March break and Easter. We have 5 participating schools. We took great care in picking our schools. They're in 21, 22, and 11 division. They're in Brampton. They're in Mississauga, they're in Malton, they're Catholic School Board and the Peel School Board. 2 are urban grant schools, and 1 is considered to be one of the wealthier socioeconomic catchment areas of the whole region. Okay? One set of indicators, applying them throughout. Because I'm not a police officer, and because I am not a police officer, and I'm not a teacher, and I'm not a principal. I am a teacher, but not of the same people that you are teachers of. We have an advisory board, and the advisory board has an inspector, a staff sergeant, 2 MPUs. We have 2 researchers from each board, 1 principal, 1 vice principal, and then we have a bigger one that is the deputy, etc. All right. We've had more meetings than you can shake a fist at. We've had informal consultations over email. The first thing that was very, very difficult was actually figuring out what the NPU does. And that might sound very easy, but it's very difficult to get a grip on the police role. And the job description is very incomplete because the police job itself, no matter what job you're talking about in the police, is complex, ever-changing, non-routine, etc. So if we're going to do SROI, we have to actually measure activities, time and activities, and attach that to value. So the first trick was figuring out what they do. And that might sound easy, but it took probably 100 hours to actually figure out. So my OPP friends were going, oh my God, this slide alone is worth coming to the presentation. This is what the NPUs do. They do a variety of activities. And I think it's, when we think about what police officers do, quite often we think of enforcement and reaction. But the NPUs spend a lot of time in proactive activities. And in fact, I think that's the true value of what they do, is they're actually working with these students and the teachers, etc., to stop things from happening, as opposed to dealing with them when they actually happen. So this particular matrix, police officers gather intelligence and then they use the intelligence, and they use it proactively or they use it in enforcement. And I won't go through all of these, but let me tell you that just as a measure of cooperation, the 10 NPUs in the 5 schools, the Peel Police figured out a way to capture activity data using their shortwave radios. And so all the police officers have recorded for the last 4.5 months, anytime they started and ended one of these activities, which shows huge commitment. And we have 2,600 records of their activities and what they did each day, which is it's daunting, and I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but it's amazing to have that kind of data, all right? We have collected a lot of data. We began by interviewing the 10 MPUs who were assigned to each of the schools before they actually started their work in the school that year. We interviewed them again just now. We have or will interview all the staff sergeants who they report to, and I was going to interview staff sergeants in patrol and homicide, but they convinced me that I should do sergeants, not staff sergeants. And just anecdotally, really interesting, when we came in today, the deputy and I, we met a staff who was there, and he goes, oh, that program, that research, oh my God, you should talk to me. I know 3 examples without even thinking about it of how they saved me time as a homicide inspector. Okay, so, you know, until you actually study this, you are not going to be able to articulate. And so we're saying, well, we would like to talk to you, thank you. And some of your friends too. We have done 10 ride-alongs, and you know, if you want some interesting experiences, yeah, my PhD student who did 10 ride-alongs with these officers for the whole day and find out what they do. He was absolutely boggled. And one of the things that I think I'll just mention fleetingly, though I'll come back to when you get the full report on the study, was they spend a lot of time in the middle schools. I don't know if you knew that, because there are no officers in the middle schools full time. And when if there are attachment area middle school where there's a challenge, those officers also, see both of those officers are also aware of those students as well. And so in terms of because I talked to your principals and vice and do interviews with them, and they're going, oh my God, please don't stop this program. In fact, we think if there's any message to go to the board, it should go to the middle schools as well, which is kind of interesting. We interviewed a vice principal or a principal in each of the 5 schools before the study started. We just finished interviewing 45 of your administrators. We interviewed principals, vice principals. At all of these schools, there's people who work with high-risk students. So there's counselors, there's social workers, there's learning specialists, etc. So we interviewed all of them as well. We've compiled profiles of the 5 schools where we looked at the SRO, Social Risk Index, the stuff from Fraser Institute, a lot of stuff. And we did a student survey, and we are doing that survey yet again. We interviewed it, we sent that survey out at the very beginning of grade 9 and 10. And the reason we are picking, it's very difficult to do longitudinal research on a program that's been in place for a long period of time. So we're picking grade 9s because those grade 9s come from schools where they weren't exposed to police. And then we're going to look at what's the change in those grade 9s attitudes 9 months later, after they've been exposed. And we're going to also compare them to grade 10s who've been in the program for a year, all right? The fact that we got 1,300 respondents, and again, I can't thank you guys enough. The cooperation of your staff is amazing. It makes it a pretty interesting survey. So this survey, it collected a lot of stuff, a lot. And I can't even give you close to a quarter of the data. So I just picked some things. How much contact they've had, their reaction to the program, their attitude towards the program, their view of their officer at the school, positive and negative, their view of the police in general, positive or negative. Had they or a family member or a friend been stalked by the police or been arrested by the police? Had they personally sought help? Had they sought help for a friend? Had they sought help for a family member? Because one of the things that is striking is these students build a relationship with the officers. And when there's spousal abuse at home or violence in the family, that's the police officer they come to. They don't go to Peel Police, they actually go to the officer in their school. And then, by that, it ripples into Peel Police. Whether they witnessed a crime, their perceptions of safety, stress and anxiety. We collected a lot of measures on mental health. And I think probably the thing that shocked me or worried me the most was the mental health, or lack of health. of a lot of the students in our school right now. And if we actually come down to it, I think that a lot of issues out there right now are mental health issues. And the fact that we don't have funding, we don't have programs, and it is fallen to the police to do mental health when in fact that we need more trained specialists to do it in more spots. Consequences of feeling unsafe at school, likelihood of missing or avoiding school. Because if they quit school or miss school and their academics suffer, then in fact we know that that will cost them for their whole life. Because if you don't have education in this country, you tend not to have a good job and you tend to be in a cycle of poverty. Offenses, how serious they thought different offenses were, and a few things that we thought would indicate their engagement. So did they play on a sports team? Do they have a part-time job? Do they volunteer, etc.? Now the distribution was interesting. You can't get this, but I mean it was perfect. It was half male, half female, and 6% who preferred not to say. Which is interesting, because when I survey the workforce, I never have to include a question on I prefer not to say. There was a great distribution between the 5 schools. Half were in grade 9, half were in grade 10, which again is what I would have wanted. I picked selectively because I know that I've only got a limited amount of your time. We asked them about how serious they thought certain crimes were, and then how likely they were to commit those crimes and how likely they were to be caught if they commit those crimes. The crimes, so we did all kinds of fancy statistics. We took all these crimes, which by the way we got from a survey that was conducted in England. And it divided into 3 groups. So crimes against person, bullying, cyberbullying, beating somebody up, harassment because of gender, sexual preference, property crime, so a whole bunch of ranging from quite trivial to a bit more significant, alcohol and drugs, so underage drinking, using weed, using harder drugs, and selling weapons, and then whether they carried a concealed weapon, and whether they thought that was a crime. So we viewed crimes again. What was interesting to me was, so the education we're providing on cyberbullying and harassment and crimes against people seems to be really working, because they rank that as the most serious crime. You shouldn't harass, you shouldn't bully, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, which is great. Drugs and alcohol, not so big a crime. It's like, and the soft ones, well, really, probably you shouldn't be thinking of this as a crime. On a positive note, they did view hard drugs as a crime. What stunned me, I think, was 15% said carrying a weapon wasn't a serious offense. So that one is worthy of note. And then again, and I didn't put it in here, but about 15 to 20% say because of their situation, they suffer stress, anxiety, they engage in harmful self-behavior. So there is definitely a mental health issue. So we asked them a bunch of questions and a bunch of adjectives. And so the one is on attitudes towards police. And so this is police in general versus NPUs. And the reason we did it this way is because the research seems to suggest that exposure to police early, in a non-threatening situation, in an area where the police actually can help them, and they get to know police as a person and a human being as opposed to an office with a uniform, etc., and not scary, makes a big difference. If you build relationships early, those relationships spread through life. So we asked them, and so what we hope is attitudes towards police, attitudes towards the police officers themselves will improve when we do the survey the second time. But even so, look at the positive attitudes. People, so it was from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Generally, the students believe police protect people like me. I feel I can rely on the police if I'm in trouble. All things considered, I really like the fact that the police are around. That is a hugely positive endorsement. Now this one is interesting, and it supports the idea. I view the police as racist. If we look at, generally it's not at all. It's skewed negatively, but that's police in general versus their MPU. MPU, no, they're not racist, they're great guys. We really like them, I can approach them and you'll see. They approach them for problems, they approach them for family problems, problems for their friends, their own problems. So they see the MPU quite differently. And I think that is one of the huge values of the program, that in fact they get to know police. View the police as rude, view their MPU as rude. Both of them are positive, but very positive about their MPU. View the police as aggressive, view my MPU as aggressive. Again, positive skewing no matter what, but look at how they view their own officer versus police in general. I feel safer when I see the MPO assigned to my school. I feel safer. Mostly, they feel safer. But I think, this one was the most positive, and I think it's the one that is the most important to pay attention to. We asked these students, all together, how do you feel about that program in your school? And if you look, only 15%, and that's if we're the most rigid on how we look at negative, say it's not a good idea. The skew is huge. This is a really good idea, and I feel safer in my school because that officer is there. I don't feel bullied, I don't feel harassed, I don't feel the officer's racist. I actually feel safer. I feel less stressed, I feel comfortable reporting a problem. All of these are quite positive responses. I'm comfortable reporting bullying, harassment, and I'm comfortable reporting crime. So to me, I did put that in there. Last semester, how often did you miss school because you were afraid of being bullied? Miss school because you were afraid of being harmed? Miss because you were bullied? And miss because you were physically harmed? If you add that up, that's a significant number of children, not children because they're high school students, young adults, who actually are missing school because of challenges they feel at school. And that's with the officer there, and that's with them feeling safe and comfortable being able to report, okay? Oh, and I did put it in. Once a week, or all the time, 10% said they couldn't concentrate in class because they were stressed or anxious and felt unsafe at school. Felt anxious, felt stressed, felt hard to sleep, thought of harming themselves, thought of harming someone else, felt depressed and thought of dropping out. And so, views of the police, they're positive force in society. We feel very positive about their traits. We don't see them as negative, etc. So, and I gave, this is just a summary message, stress, anxiety. So, altogether, this is an amazing set of data. I've only tapped it, and I'll tap it even more when I get the second set of surveys. All of the indicators, it didn't matter, I haven't cherry picked. I could have given you the whole set of indicators, and they would have all pointed to the same trend. They make a real positive difference in school. You should be proud that you have one of the only programs like this in North America. The situation at school is likely to deteriorate if the officers are not there on a full-time basis. All the stakeholders are very positive about the programs. The school administrators think it should be expanded to, and how you would do that, I'm not entirely sure, because there is a cost associated with that. But the fact that we're seeing such demonstration that they form attachments with the police officer, and they view that police officer quite differently, is a very, very, very positive finding. And your administrators have to a person was saying, so, let me tell you, you don't think this is at risk. You don't think. I'm going, no, I hope it's not at risk. But I do want to say that the results are incredibly positive. And I want to thank everybody for giving us this opportunity. This is an incredibly exciting project. It makes me feel like I'm contributing. And I think it takes courage to actually support such a program, because you have to be able to answer the question, why spend your money here and not spend your money here? And I want to thank the Peel Police, the two school boards, and your own leadership for actually, A, having a program, and B, engaging in such research. Because, quite frankly, we could have found quite different things, which show very different. You don't know going in. You just speak to whatever data you get. And it'll be very interesting after the second survey. So thank you. And did I get 15 minutes?
That's not possible. But you have a lot of good things to say. Madam Bromley, you have some questions or comments?
You can always hear me.
Oh, I'm supposed to turn this.
Oh, it's okay. Linda, thank you. That was very enlightening. I guess I have a couple questions to you and a couple to the chief. Yesterday was anti-bullying day, so of course we all wore pink, so this is very timely, in fact. And we all heard those stories in the news that were just devastating to some of our youth. And you can only imagine the impact that bullying has on their lives going forward. I mean, I was very shocked at some of the stories I heard, that it was so pervasive. And I guess that's one of the key issues that the NPU deals with at the schools. So I guess to the chief, is there thought about expanding this test pilot to other schools? What was the cost? And is this something you would recommend that we have NPUs at other high schools? Or, I mean, is there a negative perception anyway that now we have police in our high schools? I mean, other than the positive attributes you described, does it in any way have any negative impression that police are required to be there, other than just as a mentor and a friend and a role model?
So first of all, you have a police officer in every high school,
we do.
everyone. Do I think it should be expanded? I absolutely
So would
think
you go to the middle
to the middle
schools?
schools. And I mean, I'm sure both of you will speak to that, but honestly, I was stunned at how positive an impact, and I was stunned at how much proactive policing, how much time and energy they're spending preventing and educating and stopping. They stop crimes and they stop issues before they arise. And I think that's invaluable, and hopefully I will be able to put value on it anyway. There is, so with new people who are new to the country, you have to educate them that the car is outside the police, outside the school, not because anybody's in trouble, but because of a positive kind of thing. A lot of the people in some of these catchment, in the 5 schools that I looked at, they're first generation. One in particular, more than half of the students are very recent immigrants. And so those parents are coming from countries where police are not, they don't behave in such an ethical and moral fashion as the police in Canada. And so because of that, you have to educate the parents. But in fact, it's, so for example, the Sikh community, they are closely bonded to their police officers and believe that police are hugely valuable. Some of the other communities, they're coming in and they're going, whoa. And so that requires education on part of the school administrators and on part of the MPUs. But I'm not seeing negative,
So building trust is a key issue for us, and it's almost like building your brand early.
Absolutely.
So there's
that's
an
a good way to
impression.
think of it. I'm going to put that in my next
There you
version.
go. I'm a former marketing person. That's why I think in those terms. But certainly if we can build that trust with youth, it will take them throughout their lives. So do you see the impression, the perception of the MPUs translate generally to the wider police force?
So that's what the next survey is about.
Okay.
Okay, so we've asked them now. So we're hoping that now that they have got to know police officers, they see them at the school, they see them at lunch. Like, it's interesting, because people would say, on the one hand, they'd say, well, those guys are just standing around there at lunchtime. What are they doing? They could be giving traffic tickets. But they're standing there, they're joking, they're laughing, they're showing that police officers aren't necessarily big, scary people. They're talking about personal things with them. They're talking to them in a way that's not associated with any form of crime. And so it's that's really, I can't emphasize how important it is. So we're hoping, because if you look at how much more positive they feel about their own officer than police in general, we're hoping that, and by the way, the grade 10s feel more positive than the grade 9s already about the police. So we're already seeing that trend. They've been in school for a year. They've seen that police officer. They've got to know police officers. So I think that, yes, it's going to be very bad.
Thank you, Professor. We have some more questions.
Oh,
Madam?
just one with the chief, sorry. So they do appear to be the friend, mentor, role
Yes.
models. So to the chief, how often are these NPU officers moved in and out of each school? What is the tenure and what are their experiences? If you have any stories to share with us. Thank you, that's it.
So each officer, we have an officer in every school, and they're moved every 2 years. And often, that's always the issue with the principals, is the principals saying, oh, please don't take this officer. We've had for 2 years, can you just give us 2 more years? But for the policing, that's a real bonus. The officers who are up-and-comers really want to get into the neighborhood policing unit because they see that as such an exciting part of their career. So we do move them out every 2 years, but that's always a topic of conversation for us. So.
Thank you. Madam Nicholson, you had some question? Comment?
Thank you for this report. My passion is our youth and their future. One of the things I wanted to check is, in your research, was there any contact with the mental health and addiction nurses that are now assigned to the Peel School Boards?
Not assigned to the Peel School Board. If they were at one of those 5 schools, and the urban grant schools all had a lot of student support, we interviewed them, yes.
Okay.
But we haven't talked to, we could, but the people at the school see it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, before I became a member of the board, I spent a day at one of the schools shadowing a teacher, and I saw the positive outcome of the police officers' work for the day in that school, where there are very many challenges that are faced. So one of the things you mentioned is about mental health in the schools, and the survey has shown that there's increasing number of our children demonstrating mental illnesses. And now with a lot of refugees in the country around trauma, I'm hoping that somehow part of your research will pick up some content about that in terms of will it change the role of the NPUs? Because you're seeing more children with mental illnesses. Tony, aren't you finding that? How are you? Tony?
They're spending a lot of their time on mental health calls.
Yeah.
A lot of their time. I do know that. So one of the cases where they went to a middle school was a 10-year-old trying to commit suicide. So again, yeah, so mental health is, in my opinion, the issue. But it's the issue, it kind of permeates society right now.
Thank you. Madam Jeffrey?
You're right, this is really, really rich data, and I look forward to your report coming back. There's a lot to absorb. I guess my only comment would be the expansion to middle schools, I think, is really where we need to go as a society. I think back to when my son, who is now 29, when he was in middle school, there were young people around him who were planning to put graffiti on the school and do property damage, and he didn't know that was a crime. So we always assume our children are sophisticated enough to know that that is a crime and to talk about it, and he didn't feel comfortable about talking to his principal or his teachers at the time when it was happening. So I had to call the principal to ask him to talk about that issue. So I'm very interested in finding ways for our young people to develop a positive relationship with our law enforcement, and feeling confident and trusting them enough to have that. We keep assuming our children are sophisticated, and they are in some ways, but they're also really struggling with what's going on and what's the right thing to do when they're presented with choices. So I'm very interested in seeing it go to the middle schools, and your research is very, very interesting, and I think will help guide what we do, and clearly you're passionate about it, and it's infectious, so thank you.
I feel very, this is amongst the most interesting, I'm nearing the end of my career, and this is the most interesting and impactful research I've ever done. I think.
Thank
But I say that about other things too.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson.
Tony, excuse me. Tony, when I approached you, I guess it was 6 months ago, this board had taken a deputation from a survey that came from United Way that suggested some parents did not want the police in the school and said they were even considering pulling their children from that school because of the police presence. And after your positive feedback, and obviously I've worked with Linda for years, I felt it was really important that the board see the other side, because this was a small survey and this is obviously a very large survey, including every school. But I thought it was very important at the time that the board realized that there's a real positive influence of having the police in the school, and having parents upset with it was not something that is found right across the school board. And again, I want to thank you for that.
I distill two learnings from what you have said, Professor. First of all, thank you so much for such a wonderful analysis of an issue. Not only that, but finding new solutions. And in the long term, this is going to be very helpful as we fight costs and we fight crime and so on. So two things stand out. Number one, the image of the officers that the students have as compared to general police, which they get from the media, from newspapers and neighbors, parents. But this is their first-hand experience. And as Madam Crombie said, they're going to become better citizens as a result of that. What is the value of that? Phenomenal value. Okay, the social value is phenomenal. The second thing is, you've done this thing with 6 different areas. I would suggest to look at this study and if we can help other police forces in Ontario. You are past president of Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police. I would encourage you to use this knowledge and free of charge give it to free of charge, give it to help other people, other organizations to see the value of this thing, because I see this is in more than one dimension: cost, crime reduction, building the future of our country and our region. So if you can use your presence in that office, it may be worthwhile to have Professor Duxbury and some of your people go and help other organizations start this program.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree fully, and I know other chiefs across the province are always inquiring about our school officers, so they have a very important it is. So I also know that I think Mr. Pontus and Mazzarato probably want to have speaking points as well, so I wasn't sure. Want to make sure that they had their opportunity as well, sir.
Would you tell us in April as to how many people you have helped outside? I would like to hear that.
I can do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good morning. I think I begin by, excuse me, I'm fighting a bit of bronchitis, but I begin by extending greetings on behalf of our Board of Trustees, who just most recently have spoken very, very positively about the presence of our MPUs in our schools. I also hearken back to someone who I admire a great deal in education, who once said, "We all live with everyone's children." And I think I have just as much responsibility and desire to see the children that attend our appeal schools be successful and safe than I do for our own children. And I also believe that we serve complementary roles throughout this region. And so we're always very proud to be able to partner with the organizations without the region appeal, and for us, Dufferin as well. We've done this very successfully in the early years in our preventative programs, and we see that we're doing it very successfully in the partnership that we've engaged in with the NPU partners, because we do believe that proactive measures are the way to go. You've heard reference this morning about our mental health nurses. You've heard reference this morning about the challenges associated with stress and mental health, and we share those kinds of concerns with you. I think the complementary nature of what we're discovering through this research, through the research that we do within our schools itself, and so we do school climate surveys. And some of the things that we're noting is that while we're making some inroads in the area of bullying, we're also seeing that it seems to be heightened a little bit more with our grade 4 students, with our grade 8 students. And so when you're thinking about, the next steps around how communities and school boards can work together, about whether or not we put MPU officers into our middle schools or into our elementary schools for us, that maybe that helps to drive the decision, because we heard very clearly the impact of bullying on children's desire to even be at school, and we also know the importance of education for our students. So all of this research is very complementary and informs what certainly I would take back to our board in terms of our next steps and where we need to focus our efforts and integrate our services more. And we look forward to continuing to provide additional support and information to outside researchers and certainly to your community agencies, all on behalf of the families and children in this great region that we all serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mary Ann. And I too bring my greetings from principals and senior administration and the trustees of the Peel District School Board. We've always enjoyed a wonderful relationship with the Peel Regional Police, and we see them as critical partners to make sure that our schools are safe for all of our students. And when you think about the size of our schools, many of them 1,000, 1,500, nearing 2,000, that would exceed the size of many towns outside the GTA. So it's important to think about that. And schools are no different. I always say that schools are nothing but a reflection of our society. So there are needs and issues in our schools in the same way that there are needs and issues in our communities. Just a couple of things. I recall in 1991, I began as principal at Chinguacousy Secondary School, and the NPU program was just beginning there. I think Jeff Bond and Rob Ryan were students there. Rob happened to be a former grade 9 student of mine when I was a teacher. So it always comes around, full circle. But now I see they're both superintendents. So in terms of career planning and succession planning, I believe, and I think Chief Evans said, that the NPU program and experience is a critical component in rounding out that officer. And what I also know is that diversity is a high priority for all public sector organizations, boards, police forces. And what I also know is that many students, particularly coming from other countries, would have different experiences than they would here with police, both the children and their parents. And so they have a perception that is different than it is here. And I believe by having an officer in the schools and developing those kinds of relationships and acting as a positive role model that demonstrates both to the students and to their parents that police officers are helpful and they're here to help you and help citizens. I think that only helps them consider a career in policing. There are a number of officers, Paul Dillon, Matt Banting, Phil King, Harry Dillon, Tia Suganan. They're all former students of Peel, and that's just from one school. So you can imagine how many Peel and Dufferin Peel students end up becoming police officers. Probably the last thing I would say around costs, and it is hard to quantify the cost benefits, the hard dollar cost benefits. Perhaps I can give you an analogy. In education, we've determined that for every dollar spent on early learning results in a $7 savings in the future. In education costs, poverty, crime, I suspect it is very similar in NPU, that the earlier we can have young people exposed to officers in a positive way, the more likely they are to change their attitudes as adults and to perhaps consider careers in Peel. And just one final example around costs. In about 2002, I was the superintendent for Chinguacousy Secondary School, and some of the officers here would remember that we had a series of incidents where we had to evacuate the school. We weren't sure whether it was an environmental issue. It turned out it was pepper spray that was being purchased at a flea market in Toronto. Nonetheless, there were probably 7 incidents where we had to evacuate the school, and every form of response was brought to the schools. I can't imagine the cost of one of those. There were 7 of them. The police were able to solve the crime through tips that the NPU officer received from students at that school. So we could try to measure that. That's significant in terms of cost savings. This is a wonderful survey, and I don't want to burst your balloon, Linda, but we probably knew this. Certainly if you asked every principal, every teacher in a Peel or Dufferin Peel school, they would have told you the same thing, but we're delighted that we in fact have a rigorous study that tells us what we already knew. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. This is very positive reinforcement for a program that's working very well, and you're right that we feel we all knew that this is the right thing, and we are helping the future generation be a better citizen. So thank you so much, and I think there's more to come, and the chief is going to be following up on considering looking at middle schools and where it can be expanded. So thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to also just add in the fact that apparently there's 47 middle schools in the Peel Dufferin. And their Catholic schools have no middle schools, but they have grade schools. We do have officers teaching in the grade schools and the middle schools right now, different programs. I also want to just let the board know that I've met with both Mr. Mazzarano and Mr. Pontus last month. We talked about how do we engage more students with Peel Police in a positive way, and we're looking at, so if we can develop a program in-house that give the students the opportunity to get their 40-hour volunteer hours, working and volunteering with Peel Police, that will also give them another opportunity to work alongside us at community events to demonstrate our different relationships with the students in a different manner as opposed to just seeing us as law enforcement. So we're working with the schools as well. Thank you.
Motion to accept the report. Ms. Nicholson. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Want to introduce the second presentation, Chief?
Good morning. So we also have
Is there a professor from my hometown here?
I guess I'll have to do.
Good morning and welcome, Dr. Duxbury. How are you this morning?
I'm excellent, thank you.
This is the one who's going to talk about
Thank you for inviting me.
how wonderful Peel Police is.
Thank
Just
you.
watch this.
Thank you for having my presentation. So, hello everybody. I'm back again, and I'm delighted to be back and give you what I think is another piece of incredible good news.
There you go.
I asked the chief to sorry. Sorry about that. I asked the chief to share with you Public Services Canada, Public Safety Canada asked us to write up a document about the whole social return on investment exercise we've been doing with Peel for the last several years, because no other police service in Canada has used that approach. And so the document has been submitted to Public Safety, and I asked a copy to be sent to you, because that will be available to every police service in Canada, and it's saying some very, very nice things about Peel. And so you should be aware that it's probably the first in a long chain of documents that will be coming out of this particular research exercise that will be saying a lot of nice things about Peel. So you should be ready for that, because it's just the beginning of us bringing the data out. Now, first I have to apologize. I was teaching an overload this term, so the big work on the SRO stuff is coming out starting in January. So again, but I have got some preliminary data to share with you, which I think is quite interesting. I'm not going to go through the whole history again and what we've done and how we've done it, because I've spoken to you guys before and I kind of wanted to get right to some of the interesting data. If you'll remember, Peel Police are the only service in Canada, to my knowledge, that has a full-time officer assigned to every high school in the region. And the understanding, how do you show the value of putting an officer in every high school in the region when the cost is apparent, but the value of having an officer is much less apparent and harder to do. We start with what is the purpose of having the officer in the school, and everybody agrees it's to create a safe and positive environment in which to live, work, visit, and learn. And so that was the goal of our study, to show if in fact that is occurring, and if in fact it is, how is it occurring, and what value. We know the cost of putting an officer in 76 high schools. What is the return on investment for actually doing that? The first thing we had to do, and it took well over a year. And I think what is interesting is, as somebody who studies and works with the police a lot, the police have now become everything to everybody, which is, and we've seen what we call role creep. You know, as we've cut all kinds of other community and social services, the police are being asked to do mental health calls, the police are being asked to be parents, the police are being asked to do a lot of stuff that traditionally was not in their role. The first thing we had to do was find out what police officers who were working full-time in schools actually do. And that's not an easy task. And what you see is they spend their time in 19 different activities. Half of those activities are reactive and enforcement related, and half of those are proactive and preventive, which I think is really important to recognize, because how do you show the value of something that never happened? So if the officers do a good job, crime doesn't occur. And how do you actually demonstrate that crime didn't occur? That was one of the first challenges that we had. The other is the officers in school spend a lot of time gathering information, which is part of the preventive function, or making it easier for officers the rest appeal. I think we didn't realize how much time, energy, and money these police officers in the school are saving Peel Regional Police as a whole, because they're so plugged into the communities in which they work and live, really, that actually they make solving crime much quicker, or actually finding out what is going on. The other thing that the police officers do is they've had a tremendous amount of training, they've got a lot of expertise, and they can use the information and the expertise and training to do these 4 activities. So we were very, very lucky to have the complete cooperation of Peel Police, and we could never have done this. And if you read the document that we sent to public safety, we said, don't even try this if you don't have complete and utter support from everybody involved in this exercise, because it's hard to do and it takes a lot of time. So the officers actually in the schools kept track, if you can believe this, of how much time they spent in each of the 19 activities over the whole school term. And we have amazing data on what they're spending their time in. So this particular chart shows you. And what I thought was very interesting is they spend almost as much time in enforcement as they do in prevention, which I think is quite an important thing. And the other thing that I was actually kind of surprised at, and I hope you share my surprise, is how much time they actually spend in report writing and documentation. We weren't actually anticipating that going into this study. They spend about 20% of their time. And what is interesting from talking to other services like the OPP, etc., they say any time you're working with youth, the amount of documentation, you know what I'm talking about, the documentation following up is tremendous, all right? And so by doing their job, they're penalized by doing more documentation. So officers spend 41% of their time in enforcement-related activities, in other words, reactive, about the same amount of time in prevention-related activities, which is very interesting. Half of their time was spent using their training to do their job in the school, but 1/3 of their time was actually spent gathering information to prevent crime from going on, all right? So we collected a tremendous amount of data, and that is a curse and a blessing, because now we've got to process all this. To actually demonstrate value, you've got quantitative data, but a lot of the data coming out of this, how do you actually put value on stopping of a suicide, or dealing with bullying in the school, or actually making younger people so comfortable with the police that they report cyberbullying, or report the fact that in their family situation their father is beating their mother. How do you put a value on that kind of stuff, which came up over and over and over again as we did the study? We've got a tremendous number of interviews from the officers involved in the role, all of whom I guess I would like to publicly commend to the chief and to the deputy who was a huge help in getting this job done. These people are amazing people. They care about the students, they care about the community, they care about the school. And how you put a value on that level of caring is difficult. We did, and I've got a document here that I can't share until I strip out details like schools and stuff. But I had a student do 10 ride-alongs, and he spent 10 full days with officers at the 5 schools participating. And he said, you know, I don't think the community has any idea of what these officers face and how challenging it is. You know, I mean, I'm older, I'm a baby boomer, and for me, high school was a wonderful place. Now it's a much more challenging environment for many of our young people, and I think it's important to recognize that. The amount of cooperation we had from the 2 school boards is really also very laudable, and it shows the value from the very top of both of those school boards right down to the administrators of the schools themselves, how valuable they see the program and how they couldn't imagine doing their job without these officers. We also compiled profiles. So we did 2 surveys. Now the big problem that we had was we would have liked the Peel Police not to be so proactive and put this program in place 2 decades ago. It would have been so much nicer to do a before and an after, but that was not the case. This program has been available for a long time. And so what we did was we looked at grade 9 students, and we looked at them from the second they came into the school, and then we looked at them at the end of their school term. So they came from a school where there was not the same kind of police presence to the high schools where there was a full-time officer, okay? We had 1,300 students responding at the first time period, grade 9 and 10, and then we had another 800 students, which is a phenomenal number, and again shows the dedication of the school staff in facilitating getting this kind of response from their students. So it was interesting, and I'm a data wonk. I love data, I'm sorry to say, and you can tell that by all the data we collected. So I love data. And so all of my stuff is data-driven. So we had this data on grade 9 students, very complete surveys, before, just when they started and then 4 months later. So we were expecting to see differences over time. As they're exposed to the officer, they should feel safer. They should feel that if they had an issue, they knew who to go to. Bullying, they should have felt more secure that bullying, etc. would be dealt with. When we first did our, and to take you back a step, there was, because the school board has certain regulations, we asked for the gender of the people who were filling out the survey. So we had male and female, but we had 10% of all the people who answered the survey said that they would prefer not to identify their gender, or they had no preferred gender. Who did the police make a dramatic difference to? That group. And I'll show you the data in a minute. So the presence of the police in the schools, the first group they really make a measurable, significant difference over time to is this particular group. The second group is females. Female students in particular, anxiety, stress, depression, self-harm, I'll show you the data in a minute, go down over time. Who they don't make as big a difference for are the males. In fact, we were seeing great data, females, big trends, prefer not to say big trends, but men, nothing. But then we went, well, geez, we've got a lot of people who are coming into grade 9 who've actually, believe it or not, already been arrested. Yes, I have had interactions with the police. Their family members have been arrested. They come into the school and they've already. So what we did was, we looked at in the data that I'm going to take you moving forward, is males not arrested, females not arrested, prefer not to say not arrested, and then this other group who've had interactions, and their family has had interactions with the police before they ever entered high school. So what you can see is all of this will show you, so time one is first or second week in September when they're coming in. The second, time two, is in March after they've been one full semester in the high school with a police officer working full-time. So what you've got is male not arrested is green, female not arrested is blue. Prefer not to say their gender or don't have a specified gender is the darker blue. And then coming in and having had previous interactions before they come to high school is red. So I'm going to show you some data, and there's a lot more data, but these are kind of the ones. So first of all, what I'm showing you is all statistically significant, okay? So these lines are all significant. Time is significant, and this, what we call gender by arrested, is significant. The second thing is we've shown some of this data to people who work for community and social services, who spend a lot of money in programs trying to get results like this. And they said, how have you got all of these things significant? Because we invest in a lot of programs and we don't get anything like this impact, which would seem to suggest that an investment of officers in schools does more than a lot of the very formal programs offered by the province and at a much deeper level. And it probably, our data would say, from looking at the interview data, from looking at what people said to us, it's because of the deep relationship these officers have. They're in the school for several years. They know the community, they know the people. So for example, this document on the ride-alongs, an officer was called to a school because there was a big fight within the school where one student broke a can on another student, caused permanent scarring. But because he knew that that student was a victim of bullying, he treated, rather than, so if a member of Peel Police had come in who didn't have exposure to the school, he would have treated that student like an assault. But because he knew that this student had been a victim of bullying, he treated the student very differently. He took them aside. He talked to them. He put them into a diversion program. So it's a very different kind of relationship, and I think it's incredibly valued. So one question we said is, all things considered, when I'm at school, I feel, so in this case, safe is 1, so you want the line to decline. What you see, look at the difference between the people who prefer not to say over time. They feel it's significantly safer. So do females. Males, they're males. And the people who've arrested actually feel less safe, which is kind of interesting. Consequences of feeling unsafe, because remember, we're trying to put a dollar value. So we have to put questions in there that we can access databases that allow us to put a dollar value on it. So they come from high school, and when they felt unsafe, they felt anxious and stressed. But after 6 months with the officer in the program, you can see that all of them felt less anxious and stressed over time, even the people who had a history of being arrested. Okay, so this one's quite a good one. Having an officer in the school makes students, grade 9 students, feel less anxious, less stressed, which is an important outcome, I would say. Have difficulty sleeping. Look at, again, the prefer not to say. Look at, again, the female students, okay? Again, you see the people who are arrested tracking slightly different, but here, even the young men are seeing a slight positive impact. We were very concerned and worried about the trend of self-harm because there's a lot of documentation about how that is becoming a real problem in high school. Again, you're seeing that, in fact, that prefer not to say, much less likely to be thinking of self-harming, so an important finding. Thinking of harming someone else. Now, this one's quite interesting because you see, in this particular case, all of the other groups, except for the having history with arrested, track completely different. When we did some further up analysis to look at the people who were coming in, who had a previous history of arrest before coming to high school, all of them also thought it was okay to carry a concealed weapon. So, you know, this is slightly concerning, and I think we should be kind of happy that the officers are there, because if you go back, they're also much more careful about what they do with the officers around. Feeling depressed, again, you see that trend. You know, they don't feel as depressed, and you see a decline in depression over time. So a decline in anxiety, a decline in feeling of self-harm, a decline in depression. All of those things, when we put the dollar value on, I think will more than pay back what we're expecting. Thinking of dropping out of school, we want these people, we want young people to stay in school. My data, I do a lot of stuff on demographics and demographic change, and in this country, more and more, success in life depends on at least completion of high school. Going past high school is also a good thing. What you can see here is, again, think of dropping out. Every single group, except for the arrested group, declined dramatically with the officer in the school. And remember, when we asked the school, who is the officer in the school, just, you know, who is the group that you're concerned with? And they were very blunt. They said it's the 90% of kids who come to school who want to learn. We want to make it possible for them to learn. Right? So you're seeing that. Missing school. Again, you can see the trends. They're consistent. Everybody, for my females not arrested, males not arrested, prefer not to say, all of them are less likely to think of dropping out. All of them are less likely to be missing school. So the conclusion is that the MPO has had a significant impact on student well-being. Feelings of stress, anxiety, depression, difficulties of sleeping decline over time, as does the likelihood that they're thinking that they will harm themselves. They also have a significant impact, with the one exception of the people who are coming in who've had previous encounters, that the student will harm somebody else. Having the officer in the school decreases the likelihood that a student will drop out or miss school, because they feel that the school is a safer place, and they feel that if they are bullied and harassed, something will be done about it. The greatest positive impact on students who prefer not to give their gender and female students. Just so significant and so measurable. It's very, very, I was gratified to see it. With one exception, students who've been arrested, students feel incredibly positively about the program. We have that data. And with one exception, they have a more positive view of the officers 6 months later, 6 months after they started school, than they did when they came in. Because one of the things we wanted to show is, and it's like that beautiful video about the public school kids going. If you see police, you form a relationship with police. You know what police do in a non-threatening situation, then you have a different opinion of police. Now, what was quite interesting, and I mentioned this to the chief and deputy, we had two sets of adjectives. Do you think the police are intelligent, friendly? And then we said, do you think the police are racist, physically aggressive? The positive adjectives didn't change over time. They didn't think they were smarter, I'm sorry to say. Okay, but what they did think over time was they were less likely to say they were racist, less likely to say they were physically aggressive, needlessly, less likely to say they were rude, etc. So no change on the positive, but is a complete decline in negative views of the police after 6 months. All right. My student did 10 ride-alongs. It depends on whether you feel you have time or whether you'd like to go to the questions. I'm okay either way. I can give you a few stories, or I can just take questions, whatever you would prefer.
How about give us one story and then we can ask questions?
Oh my God, but there's so many good stories. But
Pick the best one, just like the chief picks the best one.
De-escalation. Well, I already kind of hinted at that. That was the student who was involved in a fight. Probably this one is an interesting one because we are talking about how the community views the police, and we're talking about a desire to have our police more reflective of our community. And so an officer at a particular school, which I won't tell you what it is, these two officers would stay in a central area called the Matrix. And they would make themselves available to the students to talk at the beginning of the school day. They would be there at lunch, and many students took advantage of the opportunity to come and chat with these officers. The demographic of the school is Southeast Asian and Caribbean Canadian. And in fact, this school, most of the people are the minority is in the majority, if you will, at this particular school. There was 5 students, 2 Punjabi, 3 Caribbean Canadian, 2 female, 3 male, all of whom were tremendously interested because of what they saw these officers doing in joining the police, but didn't know who to go to talk to. Their families were not necessarily supportive. These officers took these 5 students under their wing. They had them job shadow them. They took them to the station. They were very, and all 5 of these students are now planning on pursuing a career in policing. So you can advertise all you want on the web, but if you don't get the attention of the student and you don't have the student believe this is a career that they think would be useful and worthwhile, you're not going to increase diversity. You increase diversity by having people on the intake end want to be an officer, not lobby. Do you see what I mean? You have to pull them in, you have to attract them to the career. So it would seem to me that one of the main benefits, or one of the many benefits of this program, or the value, is 3-5 years down the road, you're going to see increase in diversity. And my understanding from talking to the deputy is that a lot of the people who are currently MPOs were actually in high schools and were attracted to the program because they got coached and mentored themselves 5-10 years ago. So anyway, again, thank you so much. This is such exciting. And when it does start to come out, I have to give you a heads up. There will be a lot of positive attention because I know that a lot of other services, that's why my friends from the OPP stay, because they're interested in knowing about this, as are most services in Canada, because you're fairly unique in protecting this function. So I hope you're as excited by it as I am by the results, and thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Any questions, Jack?
I'll just have one comment. You are so excited about this that it has to be something good. My other question is this data, this information you have shared with us, is it available to share with the board and our chief and her senior team, or not as yet?
Not as yet. I'm hoping by the end of January. There's so much data. Like, I mean, I don't want I'm an academic at heart, and I don't want anybody to be able to say, well, how did you know that? What's your sample like? So I want this to be solid. Sorry, that's my nature.
We will wait for perfection.
Yes, well, I am a little bit like that, yes.
I have one observation, and first of all, I think this is wonderful, and I remember your previous presentation, and I tell you, there are a lot of benefits that you said are not quantifiable.
Oh, they're not.
And the biggest one is, in my view, is that it helps us make students into better citizens who respect the police, who respect the law, and who want to be in the police. I think this is a tremendous effort. And I remember last time, Chief, we were talking about, should you consider moving it down to the junior high and also helping other forces to say, give them the information free of charge so that it can help them. So any progress made, or you want to make any comment on that?
We were waiting for Dr. Duxbury's report. I'm sorry, Dr. Duxbury, I just keep saying it. So we have been working on that. And I think I've talked to Dr. Duxbury about the whole middle schools. The issue still is, the fact is, in high schools, the officers, the students have spares. So, but we have officers throughout our school. We have youth ed officers, and we have officers in the schools but not assigned to each middle school right now. So we've had those conversations, and we're waiting for Dr. Duxbury's work to be completed before we bring a report forward to talk about the middle school programs.
And have you had conversation with other chiefs of police? Because I think not only is it a good story, but also it's something that we can help other forces in this direction. Have you had conversation with your colleagues?
Yes, I have many conversations with the other
Very
chiefs
interesting.
with that. Yes, but I think they're all looking to Peel as the ideal to say, because I think as Dr. Duxbury was insinuating, is that a lot of police and the budget restraints. I think a lot of times the chiefs are saying, okay, this is what the school programs is what I'll cut first. And I know when I became chief, that was a big concern, and to say, I mean, I think the money that we invest in the officers' schools is clearly paying off, and I think this is what Dr. Duxbury's work is going to demonstrate.
And if I can just add, I mean, I'll try to keep it brief because I am very excited. Some of the values are things that you would never know. So some of these stories, they're able to solve it. So there was a big crime at a jewelry store. It was robbed. The NPO heard on the radio. All the officers from Peel went to the jewelry store to investigate. He went, you know, I know, because I've been looking on Instagram, which is a public site, I know that this particular group of students at my high school seem to be having a lot of jewelry that they're flouting. So rather than go to the jewelry store, he went to the community. He said to a man who was standing, has anything strange happened? And the man said, well, geez, 7 students just ran over there and went into that garage. He opened the garage, tons of jewelry, crime solved in 7 minutes. But without that relationship and that knowledge, that wouldn't have happened. And I also think that the officers that go through this program, because I heard your deputization, these officers learn how to build relationships with the community, okay? It's a relationship building, career development exercise. And then when they move on and up, that's another value offered to this. I mean, I could go on, and I'm sure you don't want me to, but I could go on because it's an incredible
We would, but we are celebrating long-term tenure of several of our officers at 12 o'clock, so otherwise we will listen. We'll have more opportunities for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Professor, I want a motion to accept this presentation. Right. All in favor?
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Duxbury, I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
All right.
Welcome, Dr. Duxbury.
Thank
Please proceed.
you very much. I actually didn't think I'd get on till 1 o'clock, so or 12:30 anyway. So thank you very much. It was quite interesting listening to all the deputizations, and I certainly have sympathy for a lot of the views that were expressed. But what I'd like to do now is really kind of give you a little bit of overview of what we did, why we did it, how we did it, and key findings. Because a number of comments were made about our research, and I think it's important to actually look at the context of what we did. Because the goal of our research was not actually to look at racialized communities and the experience of racialized students. If we go back in time, this study actually started in 2015, long before the issues that took place in Toronto even occurred. And yes, I'm a business school prof, and my colleague Craig is a forensic psychology prof. And we actually got a very large SHIRK grant. SHIRK is Social Sciences Humanities Research Council, to look at the whole issue of policing in Canada and the sustainability of policing, given the costs of policing. So my focus was quite different. The costs of policing, the sustainability, the ability of communities that pay taxes to be able to maintain police services. And so Peel does uniquely have an SRO program that is in place in every high school in the region. The interesting thing is, as many officers and many programs and many policing services come under the gun in terms of budgets, because they do come under the gun as well, they have to make choices on where they put their funds. And so it's a challenge, because if you can show the cost of something, but you can't show the value of it, how do you argue for or against a program being put in place? So this was the whole premise. The program in place in Peel is designed to really, for a very, very different purpose. So it was discussed about my advisory board. I actually had multiple advisory boards. This police grant, we had 6 services across Canada participating in the study. And with not just one. We had an overall advisory board, but within each community, we had an advisory board as well. Peel was one of 6 services. The study was funded totally by SSHRC, the government. And we got, we called the school boards and we called Peel Police our partners. That's because you can't do research if you don't have people willing to be studied. So they were our partners in that sense, but we were very objective in terms of our data and in terms of our collection. So our whole purpose was trying to put a cost of something not happening, which is a real challenge, So what actually is the value of students feeling safer in schools? Thank you very much. And we did quite a big research review, and it hasn't really been done before. The police can show the value of stopping speeders. The police can show the value of programs where they enforce the law, but it's very hard to show the value of proactive policing, which is designed to build relationships within the community. Though we talk about the value of relationship building, how do you actually show the value? Now, again, a lot of questions on why we picked the sample the way we did. And I would have to emphasize that my fellow researchers are correct, that the findings that you get depend on who you sampled, what you asked, how you collected your data. So we actually took great care in how we collected our data, and we can talk about who we actually involved in this research. The real challenge we had going forward was this program has been in place for 22 years. So an ideal way to evaluate the utility or value of a program is compare a situation before the program was in place to the situation after the program was put in place. Unfortunately, we can't do that because this program has been in place for a long time. So what we did was, quite often the comparison is being made to Toronto. The program in Peel is fundamentally different from the program in Toronto. So let's be clear about that. Toronto only has officers in some schools. Peel has officers in all schools operating in the region. They have 2 officers job share 2 schools, which I actually think is a very innovative approach to this. That means 2 officers have awareness of the situations within 2 schools and the opportunity to build relationships with the school administrators, the teachers, the students, and the community within that region, okay? So the real goal was to actually use the SRO program as an opportunity to actually evaluate the value of doing proactive community-based policing as opposed to reactive enforcement-driven policing, all right? The primary responsibility of the school resource officer is to strive to create a safe learning environment at our secondary schools. This is achieved by forming positive partnerships with students and school administrators. It's encouraged that officers use a proactive style of policing and interact with youth in a non-enforcement manner on a regular basis. That was the goal. We evaluated the program against that goal, and if they meet that goal, is there a value to doing that as opposed to spending the resources on something else? Now, I too believe very fundamentally and strongly in more resources for mental health. My daughter's just finishing her PhD in clinical psych. Mental health is a big issue in this country. But I think we have to recognize that the school board budget is a very different, the school police budget is a very different budget from the budget that would be used to actually hire more counselors at schools, mental health in the community, etc. If we take away the school resource officers, the $9 million will not necessarily go to programs such as the ones that the deputizations talked about, which I agree are very valuable, but they come out of a different pot. So let's be clear of that. So our study was longitudinal in nature. It was multi-method. So people are talking about our interviews with students and ignoring the fact that we also collected data from the administrators, the principals, the officers, and we collected a lot of survey data from the students themselves. We also did ride-alongs. We, as in my PhD student, did 10 ride-alongs. That's ethnographic data, which means we got to observe what was happening, not what people actually told us. The 5 schools that participated in the study, we selected them on purpose to represent the diversity of the program. If I had any bias going into this study, it was that perhaps we didn't need to put officers in schools that were in in regions where socioeconomically the population in the community was doing better. So we made sure that we studied one school that was in a more affluent area. We studied 2 schools that were in, because we looked at the demographics of the community. We looked at a lot of different statistics when picking our schools. And then we picked 2 schools that were urban grant schools, which were in areas that were socioeconomically challenged. It was pointed out that the students, only 25% admitted that they said that they were a member of a racialized community. In these schools that participated, in some cases, more than 95% were racialized. So I would expect that most of the students we surveyed in grade 9 were in fact in racialized groups. That being said, as researchers, we know that people are very concerned about being identified when they fill in surveys, and quite often they don't give us key demographics like either gender or race, or there's lots of things that we would find that people would eliminate, and we didn't force them to fill in any section of the survey at all. So the program has been running for 22 years. How do you actually evaluate a program? So what we do know from Peel Region is that the middle schools do not have full-time SROs in those schools. They are policed by the neighborhood community program, and the officers would be there as needed. They would do education, but they are not there full-time. They come into high schools, and in that case, the officers, we have 2 officers sharing 2 schools, so they are there, they police these 2 schools full-time. Not just the schools, by the way, but also the catchment areas around the school, which is why they're not in the schools full-time, because they're also responding to the needs of the community, and they're also making sure that students feel safe when they commute to and from school. So what we did was we surveyed these grade 9 students when they came from grade 8 right into grade 9. So they're coming from an environment without an officer in the school to an environment where there is an officer in school. And then we surveyed them at the end of the first term. Now, you're right, I would love to continue this study, and I would like to keep doing it and survey them through grade 9, 10, 11, 12. We have funding. We have funding from the government in terms of this research. We can only research what we've got funding for. Our project was to look at the value of this program, and this is how we chose to do it, all right? In terms of the data, we have a lot of data. We interviewed the SROs before they started with their grade 9 class. We interviewed them again at the end. We interviewed the administrators before the program started. We interviewed them again. What was very interesting and probably very valuable about this, we actually spent a lot of time and effort figuring out what it is that the officers do. And then the officers themselves collected data on how they spent their time in the schools for 5 months. So we actually know what the officers are doing so that we can say they're spending their time on this and this creates this type of value. We also, yes, we interviewed students, but what we really did was survey students. And we surveyed them just when they started, and we had 610 students, which is almost 3/4 of the grade 9s in these 5 schools. And then we surveyed them again at the end of the semester. So this is longitudinal data on students' experience pre-exposure to the officers and post. And the survey instrument that we used had been pre-tested in England and had been used for a very similar study in England. Or some of the measures came from a study that had been done in the States, so validated survey instruments, all right? So what do the SROs do? And it's interesting because I too did a full literature search on SROs, and what I found was that most of the research is coming out of the United States. And I think we would all agree that the situation in the United States is fundamentally different than the situation here. We don't have a lot of good data in Canada in terms of what SROs do. So the first thing that we have to do is figure out how do they spend their time if we're going to figure out if what they're doing is making a difference. What we found was officers do a lot of different things. In fact, 19 different activities they kept track of for us. They engage in reactive versus proactive activities. So reactive activities is something has already happened either within the school or the catchment area and the officer is responding after the fact. Or proactive is they're doing things ahead of the curve to prevent a crime, avert victimization, or forestall antisocial activities. They either collect information or they use information skills and training. So the information gathering contributes to the development of positive relationships. Information use is some education and increases credibility. So where do they spend their time? So this is the data after 5 months of the officers tracking their time for every 15 minutes for 5 months, all right? What we found was they spend about 1/4 of their time in report writing, administrative activities associated with things that they're doing in the school. The bulk of their time, 30% of their time, is on prevention in terms of gathering information, developing relationships with the students. 26% of their time is on enforcement, applying skills, knowledge, training to respond reactively to an event that has occurred either within the school or in the catchment area. The other 2 activities, enforcement, gather information, and prevention, apply knowledge, were fairly minor in terms of what they're spending their time on. I thought it would be useful for you to see some of the activities within each of these bundles. So gather information, relationship building. Yes, as one student said, they walk around the school with the school administrator. They make themselves known. People talk to them. People say hi to them. They say hi to the students. They patrol the neighborhood around the school. They engage in sports, they engage in fundraising activities, extracurricular activities, so that students see these officers in a non-confrontational environment in a way that encourages relationship building. They use information and expertise to build credibility. So they respond to requests from members of the school community in terms of what should I do if my student, my child is being cyberbullied? What should I do here? They play an educational role. They act in terms of emergency preparedness. And you guys saw that within Peel Region just the other day when there was a threat and the SROs went in and, evacuated the school, etc. And just their presence, in fact, stops criminal events from occurring either within the school or the catchment area. They do what they call police problem-oriented policing projects, which are identified as areas of concern by the community. It could be gangs, it could be drugs, it could be prostitution, it could be whatever. And the officers work on those issues. They assist other bureaus and they respond to criminal. So criminal is drugs and robberies, non-criminal is trespassing, liquor, fighting, suicide, etc. for calls for service in the school or the catchment area. They also do, in fact, deal with mental health. And in fact, a lot of the ethnographic data and our interview data suggested that because they had relationships with these students and because they had relationships with the community, they invested a lot of effort in getting the students who they were helping or dealing with their situation. They spent a lot of time and energy actually getting them the resources that they needed. So the value of the program, both the students and the administrators talked about three main areas of value. The one was deterrence. The fact that because the officers were there, bullying didn't occur. Students, and so for example, I'm speeding on the 417. If I see an officer, I slow down. Is that a bad thing that I slow down? Or perhaps I should have been going slower all along? It's the same kind of thing when students see officers in school. They second guess their behavior. And, maybe that's a bad thing, but maybe that's a good thing too. Response time. So if officers are taken out, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be situations in the school that require the administrators to call the police. Right now, though, you've got officers embedded within the school, who know students, who are trained to deal with younger people, who actually know the community, who know, in many cases, the families of some of these students who are having issues. The response time is faster, and the interview data was pretty unequivocal that the officers responded more sympathetically because they knew the student. Many of the administrators said, and many of the officers said, if we have officers who are not familiar with the school, not familiar with young people, and not familiar with the community, we don't know that the response will be the same as when you have an officer who actually feels quite a bit of loyalty and pride in their school. The other is de-escalation, and we had many, many examples of when the officers were there and they heard that something was going to happen. They stopped gang fighting, they stopped situations from getting out of control. While all the students experienced the benefit of the program, we did note that 17% who'd been bullied or victimized in the past, which was almost 1 in 5 of the students, were likely to experience this source of value. And if we go back to the demographics of the community, and we go back to the demographics appeal in the schools that we were participating with, that would be many racialized students who are also victims of bullying, harassment, etc., who are benefiting from these officers. We collected, so if you look, the time 1 is right when the students came in. Time 2 is 5 months after the students were in, so at the end of the first school term. What you can see is the likelihood that students will miss school because of bullying decreases over time. And quite significantly, actually, the students' fear of being bullied at school, outside of school, by students and by gangs decreases over time. And should you be concerned that students still fear? Yes, we should. And we should look at that, because there's still a substantive number of students who are afraid. But we should recognize that there's also a substantive number of students who 5 months after they've started school with an officer there are less likely to feel afraid than when they started the school. Fear being physically harmed at school by gangs, by other students on the way to and from school, because that is a big issue. The commute to school and the commute home from school was an issue that many of the students spoke about. we were very concerned about the whole issue of mental health. Now, because we have to go through ethics, and we have to get ethics approval for all of our research, we can't ask, are you thinking of committing suicide? Are you thinking of harming yourself? Are you thinking of harming others? We're not allowed to ask that. So we have to say, think back to your experience in grade 9, in grade 8. Did you have difficulty concentrating in school? Did you feel anxious and stressed, etc.? Think about now. What you can see is that all of these mental health outcomes have improved dramatically over time. The students, 5 months after starting high school in a school with an officer, are less likely to say they have difficulty concentrating, feeling anxious, stressed, have difficulty sleeping, feel like harming themselves or others, feel depressed, and felt like dropping out. Should you be concerned that you've still got a body of students who feel all of these things? Absolutely. But the solution is to really find out why that is happening, and perhaps encouraging the province to use this data to fund mental health and some of these other programs that the other deputizations were talking about. Officers, and this was also talked about, officers have a unique ability to use diversion. A diversion program in the criminal justice system is a form of sentence in which the criminal offender joins a rehab program which will help remedy the behavior leading to the original arrest and avoid conviction in a criminal record. So diversion, the students had created an offense that they could be charged for. The officer has the call. Do I charge them or do I divert? If I divert them, they get no criminal record, and as long as their behavior changes over time, they won't have a criminal record. So what we found was that was one of the most valuable sources, one of the most tangible sources of value, that in fact officers built relationships with these students, and they said, you know, I know this kid is a fundamentally good kid. Rather than charge them, I will divert them. And so, you know, that is a huge benefit for students. And while we talk about educators and mental health professionals, only police can select to divert. So it's something that's fairly unique to this problem. The other thing is the whole issue of relationship building. A number of people are nervous about police. Taking police out of school won't make them less nervous about police. It won't help them build a relationship with police. To build a relationship with police, they have to actually get to talk to police in a non-confrontational situation. See that police actually are people, and that not all police are out to get them. So the relationship building is a really big one. And collaborative problem solving was mentioned by my administrators over and over. They said, we know we've got problems with some of these students with respect to discipline. We know we've got problems with respect to a number of different things. And so they use the officer as a resource for ideas on how to actually solve some of the problems that are occurring within school. When we did we did a thing called SROI, analysis, social return on investment, which is a technique, quite a complicated technique, by the way, to actually figure out the value of something not happening. And we actually hired an organization who specializes in this to do this analysis for us, which they did using our data. What we found was that the value that came out of the program was much higher than the amount that was invested in it. Well, we note that for every dollar invested in the Peel SRO program, a minimum of $11 worth of value was accrued. And again, I'm not a social justice academic, I'm a business school prof. And quite frankly, the decisions have to be made in terms of funding. And so this is a piece of information on the value of a preventative policing program that one can weigh against the other uses of the $9 million that they're spending on this particular program. What we found was that the value created by prevention was much higher than the value created by enforcement. So building the relationships, stopping things from happening, the diversion, collaborative problem solving, all of those made a very big difference, and much more of a difference than the whole issue around enforcement. And so I thought I would give you some of the words. So if you have read my report, thank you very much. It took probably more time to write than it did for you to read, but I appreciate that it is being read because it is something I think that deserves discussion. Here's some of the words of the officers. And by the way, in the interview we said, what if you were bragging about your school, what would you say? I mean, these officers are invested in these schools. They become they feel passionately about the students who they're working with. I think one of the big challenges connecting with the kids, there's a lot of negativity about the police on the TV. So you try and break that barrier, try to build a positive relationship with them and show that we're here for them. You're not looking to arrest kids. You don't benefit from that. You're actually trying to help them. Just our mere presence in the school, just that alone, I mean, who knows how much we deterred just from that? How much bullying or criminal offenses and misbehaviors just don't happen because we're there. And when we talk about the students feeling safer, less anxious, less stressed, that's what they're speaking to. The fact that I don't speed. If I see a cop there, similarly, students think about what they do if they see officers in the school. You're not going to win over every kid, but you put the effort in. You're at the school every day. You're walking the halls. You're connecting with them. I think that's all you really do. You just keep trying. They see us. They get to know us. They call us by first name. We get to know the schools. We get to know the students as well as the parents, extended families, and you're not just seen as a negative thing. The grade 9 students, I was bullied all last year, and that was a big issue for me, like all of grade 8. This school is a lot safer compared to my other school. I can focus on my study and long-term goals without worrying about being bullied. Would you talk to the police? Absolutely. My friends who go to schools where there are no police have a pretty different view, though. Like the police are bad and they don't want to have any communication with them. Here it's more like they're your friends. You speak to them if you have problems, and you speak to them if your friends have problems. And the administrators, the value is they know the kids, they understand the community needs, they work really hard to work for the kids and not against the kids. It offers the opportunity for early intervention and deterrence for those students who have made mistakes but are willing to change. I think a lot of students in our area are raised to be fearful of police authority, so it's nice for them to have the opportunity to build that relationship with an officer and to feel that sense of safety. The SRO really adds to the sense of safety so that everybody in the school can focus on education. Without the SRO, we'd be calling 911 all the time. So if we go back, we collected a lot of different data at a lot of different points in time. We were not looking at the issue of racialization. We were looking at, did this program actually deliver on what its goal was?
I'm sorry, Dr. Duxbury, we've lost quorum right now, so if you just wait a moment.
Okay. I'm almost done. Well,
Still, we've lost quorum.
Got it? Yeah. Okay, I've been at this since 2007 at Peel Police Board meetings, and this is the first time that they've stopped because they've lost quorum. What that means is that the pretend oversight people on this side of the room aren't here. We've only got 2 people. So Perez is
nothing
missing.
like trying to sneak out, and having a whole meeting.
When they all come in, then we'll...
We should all clap. Yeah.
How about a question and answer period? I got a lot of questions because I read Duxbury 3 times. Confidence in the findings. Notice that she didn't mention the Carleton Police Research Lab. Here they come. Look at this.
Thank you. Please continue. I apologize.
So we have confidence that our evaluation did what we set out to do, okay? In terms of our data. So do we think it provides real value? Yes. Do we think it should continue? Yes. Do we think other communities and other police services should consider putting officers in school? Yes, but with the caveat that I don't think the model in Toronto is the best model, where you have officers in some schools but not others. I think you either go all in or you don't, because if you're only in some schools, then you do have the possibility that certain students would feel targeted as opposed to when it's in all schools, okay? I do want to acknowledge, and I'm using the word partners on purpose, because we could not have done this research without the cooperation of the school boards.
And by the way, that's bullshit. All they had to do was file freedom of information, and they'd get more accurate
everybody wanted
data.
to know the answer, and so because of that, we had incredible cooperation. I also asked the chief to invite the officers who were at the schools when I did the study to come to the meeting today, and the analyst who works for Peel Police, because I would hope that you would like to join me in thanking them, because we could not have done this study without them. The amount of effort that they put in actually to track your time, think about it, every 15 minutes for 5 months. That shows, I think, a different reflection of how committed they are to the program.
Here we go.
And so I'd like to personally acknowledge the efforts of Scott Smith, Steve, I'm sure I'm saying it wrong, Jimenez, Tim Weatherly, Kayla McTaggart, John Drummond, Victoria Traynor, Natalie Flores, and Oscar Castaneda, who, without
crime
Oscar,
analyst,
we never collected all of that data. So I'd actually like them to stand up so that you can see them and acknowledge them, because they were terrific.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Come on now, come on!
That's good news, very well. So that's Carlos. This is a guy.
And 2 of my PhD students did an incredible amount of work. One of them is going to be his academic career. So thank you again, and I
That
don't
should be a
know if
warning.
I answer questions or I just leave.
Leave.
Thank you, Dr. Duxbury. Is there any questions?
Watch now, there's going to be questions and comments. Watch this. Here it comes.
Certainly.
Thank you very much, Professor, for coming and one more time sharing us the work of your very involved study. As a board, we also had to listen to the constituents as you were here before. I'm glad you were here to listen. You heard the concerns of several of the residents of Peel, including some students, and it's our responsibility to pay attention to that. So if I were to say what is the common theme that was coming from the presentations, it was that the feeling that it disproportionately affects negatively on students from visible minorities. You want to help us understand that, and
No, she
how
can't.
did your study sort of address that? Is that a fact? And how would we satisfy people who have negative feeling about the police?
And how much time have I got?
She didn't study this, by the way.
The reality is we did not set out to look at racialized communities. That was not our goal. And don't forget, I started this study in
Sure it is.
2015, so quite a while ago. That being said,
I blame
many of the
Nicholson.
students in the communities that, I would say the vast majority of many of the students in the communities, in the schools that participated, were racialized, and they benefited from the school, the officers being there. If there are concerns, I think the solution is to actually work with the communities to find out what those concerns are and address those specific concerns. I think the solution is not to take the officers out of school, but to say, why do students feel like that if officers are here, and how can we work with these groups to break down barriers? The reality is, it will benefit everybody if our police and our communities can work more effectively together and can trust each other.
Police are
And so
dishonest.
that is our goal.
They fake data,
And
they
working
withhold data,
towards that
they
goal
doctor
is, I
statistics,
think, very important.
and they lie.
Let me just, I want to hear your comments before giving kind of my personal, because of being on the board for 7 years. I draw the contrast between the reaction that the people had to street checks for carding. I personally got a vast number of phone calls and letters and so on, but I don't remember hearing one complaint about officers in the school personally. No, that's my personal experience. So I would like to think that some of this thing is education and people not knowing the difference between the Toronto program and our program, but also how much good it is doing. Hopefully that your study we can use to educate the community here to say, look, this is a valuable program and it is there to help people, not to harass them or discriminate against them. And again, I want to thank you and your colleagues and all the officers who helped me with this thing, and this is a
He
very
didn't get
valuable
my video.
study that we will explore and work with.
They
Thank
won't
you.
explore, they won't work with.
Are there any other questions to move to the board?
Let's give it to
No, and
the
would you move for the
no
presentation? Can I get a second,
woman who
please?
called for.
Jack, all those in favor? Great, thank you. We will now move into other business. First on the agenda was number 11. Norma Nicholson would like to speak to that.
Be it resolved that Peel Police review the practice of having police officers in schools and provide recommendations to the Police Services Board, taking into consideration the impact on young Black youth.